I'm lending money, I'm lending time, I'm lending concern.
What do a cartoon mogul, a mob movie icon, and a silent-era tramp have in common? They all befriended kids the world forgot, and one never missed a birthday. Number 20. Marilyn Monroe. To the world, she was the ultimate starlet, but in the mid-1950s, Marilyn Monroe quietly exchanged letters with a young boy named Peter, suffering from cerebral palsy. They met during a hospital charity event in Los Angeles, where Peter could only communicate by blinking. Marilyn, moved by his spirit, began writing to him. Simple notes filled with encouragement signed, "Your friend Marilyn." She never sought press for these visits, but hospital staff recalled she returned 3 times over 2 years, once with a rare recording of her singing Happy Birthday just for him. When Peter passed away in 1959, Monroe paid for part of his funeral expenses and asked to remain anonymous. Her personal nurse later revealed Monroe kept a photo of Peter in her nightstand drawer until her own death.
Hand and smile in your direction tells the world my heart is filled with nothing but affection.
The next name on our list didn't just send letters, he brought full stage shows to children's hospital wards. Number 19. Bob Hope.
So how do you go to the bathroom?
Aha! How do you
Few
think?
performers clocked more hours for charity than Bob Hope. While known for USO tours, his long-standing connection to disabled children is less publicized. Starting in the 1940s, Hope began visiting pediatric hospitals, not just for one-time events, but on annual rotations through Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. He frequently brought surprise guests and even reworked parts of his comedy routines to make them age-appropriate and disability-sensitive. One of his most memorable friendships was with a boy named Nathan, who had a rare degenerative muscular disorder. Hope not only visited him every year, he arranged for a wheelchair-accessible backstage tour of his radio show and later helped cover Nathan's medical transport. Hope once said in an interview, "I performed for kings and generals, but Nathan's laugh meant more." But our next Hollywood icon didn't make kids laugh, he made sure they could see magic, even when they couldn't leave their beds. Number 18. Walt Disney.
What you see today is Disneyland, but it all started from a daddy with 2 daughters wondering where he could take them, where he could have a little fun with
Before
them. Too.
Disneyland, before Mickey was an empire, Walt Disney personally visited children's hospitals throughout the 1930s and 1940s. He often brought early animation reels and even invited recovery kids to test unreleased films, using their reactions to gauge pacing and tone. At one Los Angeles hospital, Disney befriended a young girl named Ruth who had survived spinal polio and was bedridden for months. Walt not only visited Ruth multiple times, but sent animators to draw with her in person. He had a special cel-painted frame from Snow White delivered to her as a get-well gift, signed by every member of the animation crew. Though Disney rarely spoke about these acts, hospital archives show his team made over 60 pediatric visits on his behalf between 1932 and 1950. The next legend could have stayed in the recording studio, but instead, he showed up in silence for children who could barely breathe. Number 17. Frank Sinatra.
Fairy tales can come true. It can happen to you.
While the world knew him as Old Blue Eyes, Frank Sinatra was known in certain children's hospitals as the Midnight Visitor. Starting in the 1940s, Sinatra made late-night unannounced visits to polio wards in New York, Newark, and later Los Angeles. These weren't press events. He often came alone, sometimes with a small record player or cassette tape of unreleased ballads. One notable story from 1952. Sinatra struck up a friendship with Tommy, an 8-year-old with severe paralysis who could only move his eyelids. After 3 visits, Sinatra returned with a recording, a personalized version of Young at Heart, inserting Tommy's name into the lyrics. That audio was later preserved by the boy's family and played at his funeral in 1968. Sinatra funded 13 hospital beds across the U.S. in his lifetime, none under his name. "They don't need to know who I am," he once told a nurse, "just that I came." The next entry wasn't even about quiet visits. It was about loud, unfiltered, joyful love for kids who never expected a superstar to be their pen pal. Number 16. Judy Garland. In the golden age of MGM, Judy Garland was the most in-demand child star of her time, but she never forgot what it meant to feel overlooked. After The Wizard of Oz, Garland began corresponding with children at the Shriners Hospital for Crippled Children in San Francisco. One girl, 9-year-old Lucille, had undergone 5 surgeries for scoliosis and idolized Garland. Judy sent her custom-written lyrics, a hand-signed photograph, and eventually visited in 1941, bringing her a record player and singing part of Over the Rainbow in person. Garland stayed for 2 hours, reading poetry and pushing Lucille's wheelchair around the hall. Between 1939 and 1950, Garland reportedly exchanged letters with at least 22 children, according to archived correspondence donated to UCLA's Film Archive. Later in life, despite her own struggles, Garland gave several benefits to raise money for children's rehabilitation programs in Los Angeles and Boston. But our next icon did more than show up. He changed a little boy's life with a gift no one else could have offered. Number 15. Cary Grant.
Told him to kidnap me. Excuse me, madam, are you referring to me?
He was the epitome of suave, yet Cary Grant, famous for elegance and mystery, built an unshakable friendship with Bobby M., a boy born with spina bifida. In 1955, Grant visited the California Rehabilitation Institute to film a promo, but stayed long after the cameras left. He noticed Bobby struggling with self-image and insisted on speaking to him privately. Weeks later, Grant returned with a tailored suit made to Bobby's exact measurements. "You'll need this for your first date," he reportedly said. Grant kept in touch for years, visiting Bobby during follow-up surgeries and even inviting him to his film premiere of Houseboat in 1958. Internal hospital memos, now archived, show that Grant personally funded custom medical equipment for 3 other patients during that time. He refused press coverage, telling staff, "The magic isn't mine, it's theirs." And speaking of magic, the next star on our list brought real animated worlds into hospital beds nationwide.
Pretty. I fought against the studios, started to make my own deals. I was quite a good businesswoman.
Elizabeth Taylor. Known for her glamour, marriages, and iconic violet eyes, Elizabeth Taylor was also a passionate, hands-on visitor to children's hospitals. But few remember her early advocacy for children with epilepsy and congenital brain injuries, especially after her goddaughter, Rory, was born with a neurological disorder in the mid-1950s. Taylor became a regular at Cedars-Sinai and UCLA Pediatric Neurology between 1956 and 1965, often showing up in full costume between studio shoots to read fairy tales, comb dolls' hair with young girls, or simply hold babies whose parents couldn't visit. She once bought out an entire ward's Christmas gifts when the toy fund fell short and delivered them herself. In 1961, she co-chaired the Los Angeles Children's Rehab Gala, raising over $200,000, an enormous figure for the time. Taylor's handwritten notes to disabled kids remain preserved in several family scrapbooks, some now donated to UCLA's library archives. The next celebrity didn't drop in between movies. He went to war for kids who couldn't stand up. Number 13. Ronald Reagan. Before the presidency, Ronald Reagan was an actor known for the Newt Rockney in Bedtime for Bonzo. From 1957 to 1966, he quietly volunteered with the California Association for the Physically Handicapped, inspired by his friend and wartime amputee, Captain Leo Thompson, who lost both legs in World War II. Reagan began by reading to disabled children in Pasadena and hosting private screenings for those in wheelchairs. His most impactful work? He personally lobbied studios to install wheelchair ramps in screening rooms so kids could attend premieres. One well-documented case involved a 10-year-old boy named Jerome with spastic quadriplegia. Reagan visited him monthly during his recovery, even pushing his wheelchair across Sunset Boulevard for a news photo that ran in Life magazine in 1958, but refused an interview about it. By the mid-1960s, Reagan had helped raise more than $1.4 million for California rehab centers.
Don't got any use for gamblers around here. You've done your best to ruin baseball and horse racing. This is one sport that's going to stay clean.
Our next performer didn't just make people laugh. He became the heart of a national movement for disabled kids. Number 12. Jerry Lewis.
Would you welcome Jerry Lewis?
The list of celebrity bonds with disabled children is complete without Jerry Lewis, who helped bring national awareness to muscular dystrophy through his legendary MDA telethon, which began in 1966. But Lewis did far more than host a broadcast. He personally mentored, visited, and befriended hundreds of children across America. He coined the term Jerry's Kids, not as a slogan, but from real-life hospital rounds where he'd spent hours with patients and their families. One well-known story involves 14-year-old Michael Roth, who lost the ability to walk by age 10. Jerry brought Michael on stage during a telethon in 1972, stayed in touch for the next 15 years, and even visited him during his final hospital stay in 1988. Lewis helped raise an astonishing $2.5 billion over the course of his involvement with MDA. To this day, former patients credit him for helping fund the first real hope. But the next legend didn't need a stage, just a piano and a kid in need of a song. Number 11. Dean Martin. Behind the martini glass and comic timing, Dean Martin harbored a deep, private affection for children with disabilities, especially those affected by developmental disorders and visual impairments. In the early 1960s, Martin became a quiet donor and volunteer for the Braille Institute of Los Angeles, where he funded adaptive music equipment for blind children. One standout case was 11-year-old Angelo, who was both blind and partially paralyzed. Dean personally arranged for a customized Braille piano tuner to be built for him, flown in from Italy, and later visited Angelo's home with NBC cameras off. Martin also co-hosted several closed-door fundraisers for United Cerebral Palsy in Las Vegas, raising nearly $300,000 from 1965 to 1970, an amount adjusted today to over $2.4 million. He rarely spoke about this side of his life. "It's not for the spotlight," he once whispered to a nurse. "The kids are the headliners here." Our next icon brought her sharp whip and soft heart straight into therapy rooms. Number 10. Lucille Ball.
Girls, now this is your last chance. If one piece of candy gets past you and into the packing room unwrapped, you're fired.
America knew her as Lucy, but Lucille Ball became a real-life hero to children with autism and developmental disabilities long before these conditions were understood by the public. After filming I Love Lucy, Ball visited the St. John's Hospital pediatric ward every month during the 1950s. There, she formed a friendship with Susan L., a 6-year-old girl with nonverbal autism. Lucille brought books, colored scarves, and recorded short Lucy skits on cassette for Susan to play back, believing that laughter could connect where the words could not. In 1957, when Susan began mimicking Lucy's gestures in response to therapy, the hospital staff wrote to Ball calling it a small miracle. In response, Ball donated $25,000 to establish sensory therapy resources, equivalent to about $270,000 today. She made no public statement about it, but her ongoing friendship with Susan spanned a decade, ending only when the girl's family moved out of state. The next legend wore a priest's collar on screen, but off-screen, he stood by a little girl in her darkest hour. Number 9. Spencer Tracy.
It became clear that we had one single day in which to make up our minds as to how we felt about this whole situation.
Known for his gravitas and unmatched screen presence, Spencer Tracy also carried private pain that shaped his quiet devotion to disabled children. His own son, John, was born deaf in 1924, a time when few resources existed for the hearing impaired. Rather than hide his son's condition, Tracy devoted part of his fortune to developing what would become the John Tracy Clinic in Los Angeles. But Tracy's care extended beyond his own family. By the 1950s, he began visiting the clinic anonymously, sitting in on speech therapy lessons with children he'd never met. Records show he funded the education of at least 7 children with full scholarships between 1953 and 1965. He also visited terminally ill patients at Children's Hospital in LA, where one nurse recalled he'd just sit there, quiet, grounded, but the kids knew he meant it. The next name didn't need Hollywood clout. He used his hands, his voice, and his faith to lift spirits across continents. Number 8. Danny Kaye.
Who is always in my corner? Who is always on my side?
Celebrity Ambassador was a common title. Danny Kaye held it with integrity. In 1954, he became the first official UNICEF ambassador, focusing heavily on disabled children in post-war Europe and later in Asia. One of his earliest missions took him to a refugee hospital in Naples, where he met Giovanni, a boy who lost both legs during a bombing. Kaye not only performed for the ward, but flew Giovanni and his mother to a U.S. rehabilitation center, paying all travel and medical costs himself. Over 25 years, Kaye visited more than 60 countries, raising funds and awareness for children with polio, limb loss, and congenital disorders. In Korea alone, he helped sponsor orthopedic clinics that served over 12,000 children by 1970. He even piloted his own plane across continents to reach small, rural clinics. In 1965, he said, "I may play a fool, but I show up like family."
I was born to be a dancer. And when the music plays, the ants in my pants do tourgite.
The next star on our list didn't travel the world, but what he did for one child in New York changed that family's future forever. Number 7. Gregory Peck.
Sadly, there are little children 4, 5, and 6 years old who are already headed for lives of frustration and misery.
Known for portraying moral titans like Atticus Finch, Gregory Peck lived out his screen values off-camera too. In the early 1960s, he formed a little-known bond with Raymond, a 12-year-old boy born with spastic cerebral palsy. They met during a fundraiser for a children's rehab clinic in Manhattan. Peck visited Raymond several times over 2 years, brought him signed books, and once surprised him with a private screening of To Kill a Mockingbird. But more than gifts, Peck offered Raymond something harder to give: time. He spent entire afternoons helping him learn to pronounce vowels, encouraging speech through reading and patient conversation. He also worked quietly with the Association for the Aid of Crippled Children, and during his term on the American Cancer Society's board, insisted funds be earmarked for kids with mobility impairments due to cancer treatments. His advocacy helped direct over $300,000 in research grants. The next Hollywood icon played warriors on screen, but formed a lifelong bond with a girl who couldn't walk at all.
I had a PET scan and it gave me time. Precious time.
Number 6. Charlton Heston. Few knew that Charlton Heston, the chiseled face of Ben-Hur and the Ten Commandments, spent decades working with Shriners Hospitals for children. His journey began in 1958 after meeting 10-year-old Martha, who was born with spina bifida and had undergone over a dozen surgeries. Heston met her during a photo op, except he stayed long after the cameras were gone. According to Shriners records, Heston returned to visit Martha regularly until she turned 18, even bringing her and her family to a private screening of El Cid. In later years, Heston donated more than $500,000 to pediatric spinal research and personally sponsored 6 children's therapy regimens through Shriners. A hospital administrator once said he never acted like Moses, he acted like a dad. Even in the early 2000s, while battling Alzheimer's, Heston made efforts to appear at children's fundraisers until he could no longer speak. But the next star gave a lifetime of song to those who couldn't always sing back. Number 5. Sammy Davis Jr.
Sammy Davis Jr. pays an emotional visit to General Hospitals.
Sammy Davis Jr., known for dazzling showmanship and civil rights advocacy, formed powerful bonds with disabled children, particularly those with visual and limb impairments. After losing his own left eye in a 1954 car accident, Davis quietly began visiting blind and amputee children in hospitals throughout New York and Los Angeles. In 1962, he met Carlos, a young double amputee in Harlem who adored tap dancing but had lost both legs to infection. Davis arranged for a custom set of arm-mounted tap devices and taught Carlos rhythmic patterns using only claps and shoulder motion. Sammy later founded the Yes I Can Foundation, named after his personal motto, to support physically disabled youth in the arts. Between 1965 and 1980, his fundraising concerts brought in over $4.1 million, benefiting therapy clinics in 3 states. He said in 1977, "They see me on stage, but I see them always, and I show up." The next legend was the silver screen's gentleman, but off-screen, he stayed committed to children born with silence. Number 4. Fred Astaire. Behind the perfect posture and crisp rhythm, Fred Astaire carried a quiet passion for helping hearing-impaired children. Sparked by his sister Adele's volunteer work in London, Fred became involved with the California School for the Deaf in Riverside during the 1950s. He began offering private funding for dance therapy programs, convinced that movement could unlock communication where sound couldn't. One success story: Marie, a girl born deaf with limited verbal skills, attended a motion-based rhythm class Astaire helped launch. After 6 months, her expressive movement improved so dramatically that researchers published a paper on the technique. Astaire visited the school multiple times over a decade and helped finance $150,000 worth of dance flooring, mirrors, and therapeutic sound vibration devices. But he never announced it publicly. When asked about it once, he replied, "Some songs are only meant for 2 people to hear." The next actor never danced, but what he did for one child with cerebral palsy lasted generations. Number 3. Jimmy Durante.
Fairy tales can come true.
Gravel-voiced and full of wisecracks, Jimmy Durante was beloved for his stage presence, but behind the scenes, he was one of Hollywood's most loyal advocates for children with cerebral palsy. After meeting Bobby, a 7-year-old with severe CP who loved his music, Durante committed to seeing him weekly. He'd read to Bobby, sing lullabies, and sometimes sit in silence just to be present. Bobby's mother once said, "Jimmy was the only person who treated him like a boy, not a condition." In 1961, Durante helped open the Jimmy Durante Children's Clinic in Los Angeles, where kids received free or subsidized therapy and assistive devices. By 1970, the center had helped over 18,000 children. He refused a naming ceremony and only allowed it after being convinced it would boost donations. His motto was simple and constant: "You gotta be kind." The next name may surprise you. He played monsters on screen, but became a gentle giant in real life. Number 2. Boris Karloff.
When they learned that the Frankenstein monster, the bogeyman of the screen, is actually one of the kindest, most warm-hearted men.
To most of the world, Boris Karloff was the chilling face of Frankenstein. But to hundreds of children with developmental and mobility challenges, He was known simply as Uncle Boris. Starting in the 1930s, Karloff devoted his off-screen life to visiting children's hospitals, particularly institutions that cared for mentally disabled or mobility-impaired youth, groups often ignored at the time. He made monthly visits to the Children's Orthopedic Hospital in Los Angeles, dressed in full Frankenstein makeup during Halloween seasons, and read classic tales in a gentle British accent. In 1940, Karloff anonymously donated funds to convert a wing of the hospital into a hydrotherapy center, a critical treatment for children with spastic conditions. One poignant story, Karloff stayed in touch with Henry, a boy with dwarfism and spinal issues, for 12 years, writing letters and visiting during every local shoot. Karloff's letters were later compiled into a family-published booklet titled My Friend Frankenstein. But the final entry on this list didn't just visit hospitals. He rewrote how disability was seen by an entire country. Number 1. Marlon Brando.
Hello, I'm Marlon Brando. Throughout our history, men have been drawn to our cause.
Marlon Brando, known for brooding intensity and emotional depth, developed a deep and often misunderstood connection with children suffering from physical and cognitive disabilities. After his rise to fame in the early 1950s, Brando became involved with the Wings for Life Foundation, supporting spinal injury rehabilitation. But his personal efforts were far more direct. In 1960, while filming Mutiny on the Bounty, Brando met Moana, a 10-year-old Tahitian girl paralyzed from the waist down after a fall. He arranged for her to be flown to the U.S. for surgery and rehabilitation, which restored partial movement, at a personal cost exceeding $40,000 at the time, over $400,000 today. He later supported several Native American children with cleft palates and bone deformities through anonymous donations channeled via the Indian Health Service. Brando refused interviews on the topic, saying, "Don't write about it, just write to them." His vision wasn't about charity, it was about dignity. Thanks for joining us on this journey through hidden Hollywood history. The next video reveals even more surprising bonds behind the spotlight.